Hello, everyone, and welcome to this webinar on how to write actionable and effective feature requests in ArchivesSpace. I'm Jessica Crouch, the Community Engagement Lead for ArchivesSpace, and I'm joined today by ArchivesSpace Technical Lead Thimios Dimopulos, I butchered that, I'm sorry, and ArchivesSpace Senior Program Manager Christine DeBella. We're delighted to have you with us for this webinar. This session is being recorded and will be made available on our YouTube channel and website soon. You'll notice your microphone and camera are muted. Please feel free to talk with your fellow attendees via the chat, or if you have any questions for Thimios or the ArchivesSpace program team, please post those questions in the Q&A option. We'll be holding most questions until the end, and I'll read those questions in the Q&A during that time. In this webinar, Thimios will provide an overview of how to request new features in ArchivesSpace using our JIRA ticketing system, how to write actionable feature requests with use cases and behavior scenarios, and highlight how we're already adopting these new strategies to improve the ArchivesSpace application. We're very excited to welcome Thimios to his ArchivesSpace webinar debut. Since 2005, Thimios has been developing software for small startups and bigger companies, including Deutsche Telekom, the United Nations, and Microsoft, working in Germany, Italy, and the USA. Before joining ArchivesSpace, Thimios has led software teams in various sectors. He has a master's degree in computer science and is a PhD candidate at the Technical University of Berlin. His research focus has been usability and software evaluation. Originally from Greece, he's lived for more than 10 years in Berlin, Germany, and when not in front of a screen, Thimios enjoys traveling, practicing yoga, and jazz guitar. So I'll go ahead and turn things over to you, Thimios.
Thank you, Jessica, for the introduction. Thanks for organizing also this webinar. And thank you all for your attention for the next hour. I will share my screen, or I guess Jessica need to wait.
Yeah, I need to stop sharing my screen, sorry. Got too many screens open right now. There we go. All right, sorry. Take it away, Thimios.
No worries. Thanks. Okay, so yeah, our community encourages the submission of feature requests in order to develop ArchivesSpace further. In this presentation, we will talk about why are feature requests so important to us, what makes them more actionable, and as Jessica said, some information about our ongoing behavior-driven development efforts, in particular using behavior scenarios as a way to describe new features for ArchivesSpace and as a way also to automate our end-to-end testing. Just very quickly, an overview of the software development process. We see the development of the ArchivesSpace software as an iterative process, and each iteration consists of writing and revisioning the specifications as a first and very important phase. Generally, the idea of a feature request usually comes from a need of archivists, librarians, and researchers, people who actually use ArchivesSpace in their everyday work. And they describe their vision for new functionality in a feature request. Then a phase of planning and prioritization comes by the DevPri team mostly, where feature requests are reviewed and refined and prioritized for development. This means that the DevPri team chooses what features should be considered with higher priority. In the next phase, the development phase, the program team actually implement in programming code the feature and the automated testing for it. And the testing team is performing the manual testing of the implementation, which is all about deciding whether the feature was implemented according to the initial requirements. These four main phases are repeated as needed until all people involved agree that the feature is actually implemented as specified, which means that misunderstandings and bad communication lead in additional iterations or repetitions of this cycle until we come to a point where the implementation is as originally intended, which eventually leads to including the feature in a release and making it available to the community. So our goal is to reduce the amount of these iterations that are necessary to develop a useful feature. And part of this is actually creating actionable feature requests. So what makes a feature request actionable? First of all, being short and to the point, being unambiguous and easy to comprehend, and also complete in the sense that a feature request provides detailed information to describe the desired functionality, leaving few or ideally no open questions. So actionable feature requests are easily reviewed during prioritization, therefore more likely to be prioritized for development, making the communication between the people involved more effective, and also capturing the accumulated knowledge about a specific feature for future reference. This is also an important aspect of this. We generally use JIRA as a communication tool where we keep the discussions on specific feature requests. I could quickly show you what it looks like on a specific feature request that we currently have open. So yeah, I guess most of you are acquainted with this, but very quickly, generally a feature request consists of a title. It has a description where the functionality is outlined, and currently we have a template for this available. When you try to create a new JIRA ticket, you will have the possibility to see some pre-filled information in the description that is supposed to help and guide in the process. A description can also include screenshots or mock-ups and attached files, notes, and most importantly, underneath here we see a series of comments or a discussion going on among the people who are interested or involved in this, in defining these specifications. So this is where the communication is captured. Feature requests on JIRA are the places where people with three different roles and possibly different backgrounds meet and communicate on the topic of a specific functionality. These are, first of all, and most importantly, the users, meaning the archivists, librarians, and researchers who understand the everyday workflows within libraries and archives that ArchivesSpace supports, and are in need of a specific functionality that is not supported yet. Then we have the developers, the program team, the volunteers, and external contractors who are not necessarily archivists and need to comprehend the requirement. They need to translate it to actual programming code, software, and automating the tests, meaning unit tests and regression tests, and also need to extend the documentation of ArchivesSpace to describe this new feature. And we also have the manual testers, the group of people who are there to verify that the requirement is fulfilled, verify the acceptance criteria, as we say. we can assume that all people involved have a good knowledge of how an archive space system works. We cannot assume familiarity with organization-specific workflows or processes. And actually, I moved too fast, sorry. I wanted to stay on this slide. So the feature request on JIRA is also the place where knowledge about the supported workflow is captured, and this refers to how a specific archival workflow is to be supported by the ArchivesSpace system. But it could also include implementation-specific technical details, and most importantly, the history of the communication, as we saw before here, and which includes the people who were involved in the communication, the opinions or different ideas that were expressed, and the final agreed specification, which is super important for everybody involved. We currently try to keep the JIRA description, the top description field of this of the JIRA issue, updated to reflect the current, or at any point in time, to reflect the current common understanding of the requirements for that specific feature as the resulting consensus of the conversation that is underneath. Capturing this communication ensures that the knowledge we acquire while discussing the feature does not slip through our fingers in the future. JIRA issues are also the reference of future users that would like to add new related functionality, future developers who are possibly fixing a regression, a bug that broke the functionality, that will in the future break the functionality of this particular feature, or are there to trying to extend the feature with additional functionality, or add testing for it. And of course, future testers who will want to make sure that the feature is not broken before a new version of ArchivesSpace is released. As a template for capturing knowledge about a feature request, we propose using behavior scenarios. This is not our own idea. It has been around as a software development practice since many years. Gherkin, also known as the given, when, then syntax, is a language for writing such behavior scenarios. Gherkin scenarios are meant to be short and sound like plain English. And each scenario has this structure. It consists of 3 parts. The last part, the then part, describes the expected behavior of the ArchivesSpace system, the outcome that, or the goal that we try to reach in a particular situation by using the ArchivesSpace system. The when section describes the user actions that are necessary to lead the system to this outcome. By user actions, I mean the actions that we do on the web interfaces, the staff user interface and the public user interface of ArchivesSpace, clicking buttons, filling out web forms, etc. And the given part of the behavior scenario describes the context, or where all this interaction between users, archivists, and librarians, researchers, and the ArchivesSpace system happens. So as a bridge between users, developers, and testers, Gherkin is a plain text language with a simple structure that is intended to be easy enough to learn for non-programmers, while allowing the level of specificity required by software developers to successfully develop a feature and testers to test it. So a behavior scenario is a story that describes how a user interacts with ArchivesSpace in a concrete way, contrary to requirements that are formed as abstract statements. For example, ArchivesSpace should support Mark XML primary agents. Behavior scenarios are concrete examples of how people really interact in a specific situation with ArchivesSpace in order to achieve a specific outcome or an expected behavior. They are also not implementation specific, meaning that they normally shouldn't include low-level implementation details such as data structures or application architecture. And they should be just enough and just-in-time software design, as we say, lightweight examples that provide enough context to start developing the feature. Let's look at an example of such a behavior scenario. So the scenario line delivers a description of this this very common scenario of logging in to ArchivesSpace system as a staff member, for example, or an archivist. It is delivered normally, or we like it to deliver it in this syntax. So as a specific member of a group or a persona, I want to perform something, in this case to log in, so that I achieve a goal. In this case, I can access restricted functionality of the system, which implies that there is functionality that needs to be restricted and not available to the public on the internet. If we look at if we start from the bottom and look at the then part, we see in this case, the expected outcome is that the user is successfully logged in extent having access to this restricted functionality. In the middle, we have the user actions. In order to log in, the user needs to browse the login form of ArchivesSpace and submit their credentials. And this, of course, needs to happen in a specific context, which means that the user should already have created a staff account, and the user should not be already logged in order to log in. Note that this is not a list of imperative steps, but a short description of a specific reaction of the system to a user action in a specific context, what we call a behavior or a behavior scenario. Because they are written in plain English, they are also inclusive and understood by all the users that we referred before, users who propose the feature and possibly have no technical background, developers who write the code to support the feature, and testers who test whether the implementation of the feature works as expected. Let's look a little bit deeper in Gherkin keywords. There are not so many actually, and we don't generally need to use all of them in behavior scenarios. By the way, it is important to mention that all this is presented as a proposal to the community. It's not a requirement to actually write feature requests that should include behavior scenarios or anything in this format, but it is proposed as a way to improve our feature requests. So Gherkin includes these keywords. The feature keyword is a general description of the feature request that usually can include multiple behavior scenarios, preferably in this form that we saw before, as a specific role. I want to do something with the system so that I achieve a specific outcome. There is a background, which is an optional description of the background idea or the context of the feature request. A rule can group multiple scenarios together, and the scenario is the summary of the behavior and the given when then steps that we saw before. We also have an end keyword that can augment those given when then steps with additional steps. We will see how this happens shortly. Note that there is no or step in Gherkin. Each scenario is a sequence of steps that describe the behavior. So if an or step seems necessary while writing a behavior scenario to describe another path in the sequence of events, then it is better to actually write a completely new behavior scenario to describe this alternative path. It is important to note that this is given when the steps must appear in this order. This is because any single when-then pair denotes an individual behavior, an individual specific interaction or reaction of the system to specific user actions. So if more of these when-then pairs seem necessary, then this means that additional scenarios should be written. So each scenario should describe a single specific behavior within a specific context. So yeah, a bit more about step phrasing. We saw that the steps are in this specific order. It's a good idea to include as much detail as possible. We should not leave out parts of the step for brevity, which means that sometimes we have to repeat tediously nouns such as the user or the resource on each step, but this is worth the effort in order to avoid confusion. It's a good idea to write all steps in the third person. If first and third persons mix, the scenarios become confusing. It's also a good idea to write them in a subject predicate action phrase. Both passive and active voice can be used, but let's be sure to write our scenarios in a way that describes the intended action. Also in the present tense for all step types to ensure that each step refers to an action that happens during the scenario and not something that should have happened or will happen in the future that create more confusion. So let's take a look at a real world example. In this scenario that is inspired by a specific ticket that is in our already implemented in our system. I am thinking how to make this fast. I would love to show you what this looks like. So this particular scenario refers to the functionality that allows people to mark a specific agent link on a specific resource. We are viewing currently the staff UI, viewing a specific resource. And here on this resource, we have a few agent links already defined. And as we can see, there are two creators and one source. They have a specific name, and one of them is marked as primary. We have the possibility to mark one or exactly one as primary or none, actually. So if we mark one as primary, the feature that we are interested in makes this appear as a specific field in the XML, in the mark XML export of this specific resource, basically a field of type 100. And what is important is that originally in this in the description of this ticket, this was not so clear. And as we can see already, if we want to understand what this feature is about currently, we have to read through the complete communication underneath here that expands over a period of 10 years between the time that this issue was created and finally implemented. And I am sure that if each of us goes through this conversation, in our brains, we will form slightly different versions of what should be actually implemented. And this is what this confusion is and misunderstanding is what we are trying to avoid. If you to sum it up, during this the development of this feature, there were a set of misunderstandings that led to more iterations of this development cycle that we saw before. A specific misunderstanding was that that it was not clear from the beginning that the presentation of this primary agent link is basically only happening on the mark XML exports of this of the particular resource, and of course on the staff UI, and not at all on the public UI. So yeah, if we just very quickly, I wanted to present you this feature and what it was about in order to go through the process together of considering how we would enhance this feature request with some behavior scenarios that could avoid this kind of misunderstandings and make this particular feature request more actionable from the beginning. So yeah, this feature declaration could be summarized in this way. So as an archivist, I want to optionally mark an agent link of a resource as primary so that the primary agent appears as a 100 field in mark XML exports of that resource. The background idea of this feature is that can be summarized in these 4 bullet points. So the primary agent should appear as this kind of field in mark XML exports that actually are possible only on the staff UI. The primary agent should be marked as such when viewing a resource on the staff user interface. We saw how this happens in this staff user interface form with these buttons that allow us to choose which agent link would be primary. Then, of course, the primary agent should also be assignable while editing the resource on the staff UI. Oh, yes, exactly. This is what I just showed you. And also, they should be viewable. I mean, when we just are on the view, when we are browsing the show view of this particular resource, we can see here the available agent links, and we can see that the primary one is marked as primary on this view as well. And finally, it should not be viewable anywhere on the public UI. This would be an abstract way to describe this feature. And let's see how we do it. We would describe it using behavior scenarios, starting by the idea of presenting this primary agent link in the mark XML exports of a particular resource. So we would title our scenario as an archivist, or generally as a staff member, as a person who has access to edit resources on a particular ArchivesSpace repository. But let's take just the case of a specific archivist. I want to see the 100 field for the primary agent in the mark XML export of a resource. Let's start from while we are developing our behavior scenario. Let's start from the then part, the outcome that we want to achieve. What we want to have is that the 100 field appears in the mark XML export for the primary agent of that resource. And this also means that no such field should appear in the mark XML of any other linked agent for that particular resource. We can move a step up and see what would be the user actions that would trigger this reaction or this desired behavior from the ArchivesSpace system, which in this case could be the obvious ones, that the user browses the edit form of the resource on the staff UI, where the user has the possibility to download a mark XML by clicking on a button or whatever. For the behavior that we are describing here, the exact way that this action is performed is not important. What we are interested is in the user action without too many details of the user interface. So the user in some way downloads the mark XML export of that resource. And this, of course, should happen in a specific context, meaning that such a resource should be already created, and it should have, for example, in this particular behavior, 3 agent links, 2 creators and 1 subject, which is the case with this one. I know this is a source type, but it doesn't matter. And an additional step in this context would be that the second agent link is already marked as primary. So we have a specific scenario here where we start with a resource that has already 3 agent links. There is already one marked as primary. The user goes and on the edit form does not edit the resource, just exports the mark XML and sees that that particular primary agent and only that one is marked as primary. So the focus here is on the behavior rather than the UI or the implementation details, which could be clarified with screen mockups or other ways that we already do in many of our JIRA tickets. Let's create a behavior scenario related to the presentation of this primary agent when viewing a resource record on the staff UI. Again, we could title our scenario as a staff user. I want to see the primary agent of a resource on the show view of a resource on the staff UI, indicating that there is a primary agent defined for that resource. Again, it's a good idea to start with the desired behavior that we want to achieve, that the primary agent link basically is shown as primary on the resource when viewing that resource on the staff UI. The user action that is necessary for this to happen is, of course, that the user browses the show view for that particular resource. And this happens in the context that a resource with 2 agent links, in this case, of type creator, and exists. And the second creator agent is marked as primary. We could also add a behavior scenario describing the way that actually this happens on the edit form of a resource. So in this case, as a staff user, I would like to mark exactly one agent as primary on a resource so that it appears as primary on the edit view of the staff user interface. I didn't do the trick I did before because I guess we all get the point that it is a good idea to start from the bottom up while be developing such a scenario. So in this case, what should our goal is that we set the second agent, that the second agent does not appear as a primary anymore, but instead the first agent appears marked as primary. So this implies that there is let's go directly to the given part of the context, that the resource has 3 agent links, and the second agent link is already marked as primary. And in this case, the user marks the first one, changes the one that is marked as primary from being the second one to the first one. So this makes clear what should happen while editing these agents. Also makes it clear that the primary marking is exclusive. We can only have maximum one agent as marked as primary. Note also that this scenario is very concrete and it describes a very specific case of a resource with 3 agent leaks, etc. It is not trying to be an abstract generic description of the feature, but again, a story, a narrative of a specific interaction between a hypothetical user and the ArchivesSpace system within a specific, very specific context. If we have time later, I will also talk about another part of Gherkin that is the scenario outline that allows us not to avoid too many repetitions of these scenarios that you can easily imagine that can be necessary in order to describe more of such cases for related to a specific feature. But we can do this later. I would love to point out that when talking about behavior-driven development, we are not no, sorry. So first of all, behavior-driven development is consists essentially to a big extent of writing QZ or behavior scenarios to describe the feature requests. So as a software development practice, it aims to improve the collaboration of people interested in developing a specific functionality in what we call deliberate discovery, the phase where people communicate and have conversations to come up with concrete examples of interactions between users and ArchivesSpace in order to achieve specific goals. In other words, concrete examples of user stories and acceptance criteria. Behavior-driven development should help us to detect misunderstandings as a result of ambiguity as early as possible in the development cycle. By being precise and complete in specifying the requirements, we can avoid iterations of the development cycle. So by working together to develop these behavior scenarios, not only we decide better and faster what behavior to implement, but we develop a common language that ensures a uniform understanding of the concepts used within ArchivesSpace across people with technical and non-technical background. Also, behavior-driven development is a user-centric development in the sense that it focuses on real-world scenarios. And it emphasizes creating features based on real-world use cases that truly address the needs of archivists, librarians, and researchers. We are currently trying out behavior scenarios to define the specifications in the ongoing project of supporting multilingual content within ArchivesSpace. I would love to quickly show you. Sorry about this, but I would love to quickly show you this, how it looks like a bit on. We saw this ticket, for example, that is part of this ongoing process where we can see that related to the idea of allowing multiple recorded titles to display for ISO records in ArchivesSpace public UI, multiple meaning titles that are in possibly different languages. And you can see that already we have been developing a series of behavior scenarios to address this particular problem. In the conversation that is underneath, if you are interested, you will see that already in the effort, during the effort of developing these scenarios, we very fast come to the point where we have to identify edge cases and discuss what should happen in particular contexts or constellations. For example, these kind of translated titles already have different types: formal, devised, translated, etc. And deciding which one of them to present as the primary or, let's say, more prominent title, we have to take into account not only the titles themselves, but also the preferences of the user that is browsing the content, but also maybe the preferences of the archivists that are actually developing this content. And this has the effort to develop, to clarify these different cases and what should happen, has been supported by the effort of developing specific behavior scenarios for this particular feature. A different, I hope I can continue presenting. I have to start from the beginning. I'm sorry about this. So to go back to the place where I was. I also wanted to talk a little bit about the relation between behavior-driven development and automated acceptance testing. And to start by clarifying or stressing that behavior-driven development is not really a testing technique. It is a development strategy of thinking about and discussing the user experience before implementing the actual software, the actual programming code. Having said that, it is possible using behavior-driven development frameworks to actually convert behavior scenarios into automated tests that will then run automatically, be performed automatically every time we make changes to the code of the application. And therefore, validating that when we change something in the application code, the narratives of those particular behavior scenarios continue to happen as originally planned, and therefore validating that the functionality that they describe is not broken, as we say, is not has not changed because of the changes that of the updates that we did to the programming code of the application. In other words, test automation assures that the rest of ArchivesSpace functionality stays the same before and after our changes. This is generally referred to as regression testing. These automated tests are failing right after they are created, and that is because the functionality that implements them is generally not ready yet. So this, in the methodology of test-driven development, we first write the automated tests, and then we develop the programming code that makes these tests successful. I will show you how we are actually making already an effort to go in this direction shortly. But I would also like to stress that this by no means would replace our manual testing. we are aiming in taking away the tedious part of mechanically clicking on ArchivesSpace to ensure that functionality works still as expected. The effort that manual testers currently go through to tediously repeat well-defined scenarios of interacting with ArchivesSpace can be automated, but the way that our manual testers can use their creativity in order to find ways to actually break the system and find new or bugs or regression failures in the functionality is hard to replace, let's say. So this kind of discovery testing or explorative testing, as we call it, is something that we are not planning to replace with these efforts. Another point is that the behavior scenarios that are maintained as automated test cases essentially evolve as ArchivesSpace is being developed further, because they have to be kept up to date with the changes that we do to the ArchivesSpace code for them, so that these behavior scenarios continue to be successful and continue to validate the functionality they are supposed to be validating. In that sense, because they are written in plain English, they can serve as a form of living documentation, as we call it, that is necessarily kept up to date as the ArchivesSpace functionality is being updated. Particularly for ArchivesSpace, where user requirements and data standards may change over time, this dynamic form of documentation can be valuable. And in this moment, I would love to show you a little bit of what this looks like. So we have this repository that is currently publicly available, and for those of us that are technically inclined, it includes also some instructions of how to run these tests on our computers. And let's take a look at a particular feature or behavior scenario that is implemented in these essentially end-to-end testing suite, as we call it, that is still in the pilot phase. So here we can see a simple scenario that aims to describe an interaction where some basic information fields for a particular resource are being updated. So there is some context, the user is on the resource edit page, and there is a series of user actions. So the user selects records from resource type and changes some details of those resources. At some point, the user clicks on the save button to persist the changes that the user made. And then comes the expected behavior of our ArchivesSpace system, that there is a message displayed that makes it clear to the user that the changes were saved. And also there is a validation. Basically, the system goes through the updated fields, ensuring that the values were updated. This is just a simple test that aims to detect this kind of regressions in the standard workflow of editing a resource. What is interesting maybe is to see that each of these steps that we would all agree that just that they do not require a special technical background in order to be understood, are implemented using a behavior-driven framework using a series of lower level commands. We can see some here. For example, this given the user is on the resource edit page, there is some functionality that implements, first of all, searching for that resource, visiting the staff URL for a particular ArchivesSpace system that this scenario at some point will run against or with. And it would fill in some search box, click the search button, and then we would go back to actually clicking on the edit button after to reach the edit page for that particular resource. Maybe all this is too technical, but I just wanted to give you an idea of more or less what it looks like implementing or automating these scenarios. Again, we will all notice that these automated test scenarios look much more lower level than the scenarios that we have seen describing the feature requests and serving the communication between us while writing the specifications. Our goal is to develop this end-to-end test suite to a corpus of automated steps that can be reused in order to develop such automated scenarios, with the idea that eventually we could reach the point where people with not particular technical knowledge could reuse these already automated steps in order to develop behavior scenarios that could serve in discussions within feature requests. This is a direction where we envision these efforts to go to, and not something that we have already. I wanted also to very quickly show you what it looks like when we run these automated test scenarios. So on the right part of the screen, we see these test scenarios being performed on a browser window that just opened here. And this browser is being driven automatically by the code that implements those steps that we saw before. Essentially clicking around on ArchivesSpace and filling out forms, validating that the expected messages appear as defined. And on this, for example, here we see the scenario accession is created, being performed, and the steps, the given when, then steps of it being performed here. The green colors indicate that these steps were successfully performed as expected. If something goes wrong and one of these steps fails to execute as expected, we would see it in red here, and the continuous integration workflows that we have in our development process would essentially report this failure to developers, making it clear that some recent change in the functionality or in the code of ArchivesSpace broke the validation of a specific functionality that a specific automated behavior scenario is supposed to validate. And yeah, you can see the value of this particularly in our regression testing. I think we have observed this wonder of engineered automation enough for now. And this basically concludes the material that I wanted to present in this presentation. There are some links included in these slides that will be for sure delivered along with a recording of this webinar. Thank you all for your attention. I guess, Jessica, we could move on to a
for
QA
sure.
part.
All right. Yeah, thank you so much, Thimios. That was really detailed, and I appreciate, as an archivist and as a user of ArchivesSpace primarily, being able to see a detailed breakdown of not just how to successfully request a new feature, but how sort of this development process works in general. It's definitely illuminating. There's plenty of links on Thimios's last slide, and we will be sharing that slide with the recording of this webinar after the fact. But I went ahead and dropped two links into the chat. One are the instructions for how to request a new feature within ArchivesSpace, and the other is on using the behavior scenarios that Thimios just outlined in the webinar. So if you're interested in submitting a feature request for ArchivesSpace, be sure to lean on not just this webinar, but that documentation to find success with that. We do have plenty of time left over, so if there are any questions, please do drop those into the Q&A. I will speak slowly for now to see if any questions pop up, or if you'd like to raise your hand, feel free, so that I know that there's a question incoming. If there are no questions, we'll of course wrap early. I'm not going to force anyone to stay here longer than they need to, but I want to make sure that if there are any questions, that they get answered. All right. I'm not seeing any. I'm trying to make it like a little awkward, but not too awkward with the pause. So if I don't see any pop in to the chat soon, we'll go ahead and wrap up. But again, thank you so much to Thimios for doing this webinar and for being willing to explain to us this new process and how it sort of integrates into the larger development ecosystem for ArchivesSpace. For me, the coolest thing to watch was the automated testing. I thought that's just really cool. Of course, it doesn't replace the need for manual testing, but it just to have that and to see it just do it itself, it's very neat. But yeah, thank you to everyone who attended as well. And thank you to anyone who's listening to this recording in the future. We will make sure that the recording as well as the slides are available on both our YouTube channel and our website in the days following this webinar. And if you have any questions, of course, please feel free to reach out to the program team or talk with one another via the listserv. But with that, we're going to go ahead and wrap up. Thank you to everyone who attended. Again, thank you to Thimios, and I look forward to seeing all of you at the next ArchivesSpace event. Thanks, everybody.